never thought owning a home could feel like living under a dictatorship, but that's exactly what happened when my HOA decided to fine me for parking in my own driveway. At first, I thought it was a joke, a simple mistake. Maybe they had the wrong house, or maybe this was some absurd clerical error. But as I stood there on my porch, holding the crisp white envelope marked urgent notice, I could feel my stomach tighten. I tore it open, my eyes scanning the page, and then I saw it. Violation notice, unauthorized vehicle parking, fine, $250. I laughed out loud. This had to be a mistake. How could I be fined for parking in my own driveway? I had lived in this house for 3 years without a single issue. My black Ford F-150 sat neatly in my driveway, just as it had every single day since I moved in. There were no obstructions, no complaints, no reason for concern. So why was the HOA suddenly making an issue out of it? Determined to clear things up, I walked straight to the HOA office, which was conveniently located within our community. The air-conditioned lobby was pristine, almost eerily perfect. Sterile white walls, a front desk that looked untouched, and a woman sitting behind it with a forced smile that barely hid her disinterest. "Hi," I said, placing the letter on the desk. "I got this notice today, but there must be some mistake. I was fined for parking in my own driveway." The receptionist barely glanced at the paper before sighing. "Sir, all driveway parking must comply with HOA regulations. If your vehicle does not meet the approved criteria, it cannot be parked outside." I blinked. "Approved criteria? What criteria?" I asked, my patience already wearing thin. She tapped a few keys on her computer and read from the screen in a monotone voice. "Vehicles must be garage storable. Any vehicle that exceeds the standard garage size for this neighborhood is not permitted to park in driveways overnight. According to our records, your truck is too large." I almost laughed again, but this time out of pure disbelief. "Are you serious? My truck is a factory standard model. It's not some massive RV or commercial vehicle." She shrugged. "It's still non-compliant. You need to park it inside your garage or find off-site parking." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. My truck was too big for my driveway, so they expected me to park it off-site. Where? On the moon? "This is ridiculous," I said, shaking my head. "There's no way I'm paying this fine." She gave me a thin smile. "That's your choice. But if the fine isn't paid within 7 days, additional penalties will be applied, and legal action may be pursued." I felt my blood pressure rising. This wasn't just a simple HOA rule. It was extortion. I stormed out of the office, my mind racing. I wasn't going to let them win. I was going to fight back. I wasn't about to roll over and let the HOA walk all over me. This was my house, my property, and my driveway. There was no way I was going to pay a fine for simply parking my own truck outside my own home. But I knew one thing for sure. If I was going to fight back, I needed a plan. That night, I did what anyone would do when dealing with an HOA nightmare. I went deep into research mode. I pored over the HOA bylaws, digging through every page, every clause, every footnote. And that's when I found something interesting. Nowhere in the document did it explicitly state that standard-sized trucks were banned from driveways. Nowhere. The only mention of vehicle restrictions was a vague clause about maintaining the visual appeal of the neighborhood, and a rule stating that RVs, trailers, and commercial vehicles were not allowed to be parked in driveways overnight. But my truck, it wasn't an RV, it wasn't a trailer, and it sure as hell wasn't a commercial vehicle. The HOA had no real basis for the fine. Armed with this information, I decided to appeal the fine formally. I sent an email to the HOA board detailing my argument, citing their own rule book, and demanding that they revoke the fine. A few days later, I received a response. "Your appeal has been reviewed and denied. The violation stands. Failure to comply will result in additional fine." I clenched my jaw. So this is how they wanted to play it? Fine. If they wanted a battle, I'd give them one. I started talking to my neighbors. Turns out I wasn't the only one being targeted. Several homeowners had received fines for petty, ridiculous reasons. One was fined for having a garden hose visible from the street. Another was written up because their grass was too long by half an inch. One family was even forced to remove their kid's basketball hoop because it didn't align with community aesthetics. The more I talked to people, the angrier I got. This wasn't about maintaining the neighborhood. This was about control, power, money. So I did what the HOA least expected. I went public. I posted my story on a local Facebook group detailing every absurd detail, including the fact that my truck completely fit within my driveway and was not in violation of any written rule. The post exploded overnight. People from all over the neighborhood and even outside of it started sharing their own HOA horror stories. Comments flooded in, and soon the local news caught wind of the controversy. A few days later, I got a call from a reporter asking if I'd be willing to do an interview. My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't exactly looking for fame, just fairness, but then I thought about it. If I didn't stand up for myself now, who would? So I agreed. The night before the interview, I got another letter from the HOA, but this time it wasn't just a fine, it was a threat. Continued refusal to comply with HOA regulations will result in legal action. Further defiance may lead to a lien on your property. I read the letter twice, my hands tightening into fists. They were threatening to take my home over a parked truck. I looked out my window at my driveway where my truck sat peacefully, exactly where it belonged. I wasn't backing down. I took a deep breath, set the letter down, and prepared for the biggest fight of my life. The morning of my interview, I woke up to a sight that made my blood boil. My truck had been stickered with a bright orange warning notice right on the windshield. In bold capitalized letters, it read, "Final warning, vehicle will be towed at owner's expense if not removed within 24 hours. I tore the sticker off, my hands shaking with rage. Towed? On my own property? This was beyond harassment. Now, the HOA was actively trying to punish me for standing up to them, but they had just made their biggest mistake yet. By this point, my story had already spread throughout the community, and my neighbors were watching. Some were still afraid of the HOA, but many were now rooting for me. The moment I posted a picture of the sticker on Facebook, it went viral. Hundreds of people were commenting, sharing, and calling out the HOA for their abuse of power. The local news station that had scheduled my interview, they bumped it up to a primetime segment. I arrived at the news station ready to expose everything. Sitting under the bright studio lights, I looked straight into the camera and told my story. I described how I had parked my truck in my own driveway for years without issue, how the HOA had suddenly decided it was a violation, and how they were now threatening legal action over a completely made-up rule. I even read from the HOA's own rule book to show that nowhere did it state that my vehicle was non-compliant. Then I dropped the biggest bombshell of all. "I'm not the only one," I said. "This HOA has been abusing its power for years, handing out fines for ridiculous things, garden hoses, Christmas decorations, even kids playing outside. They're targeting homeowners, bullying them into paying fees, and no one holds them accountable." The news anchor nodded, clearly engaged. "So what do you plan to do next?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "I'm going to fight back. I'm not paying the fine. I'm not moving my truck. And if they want a legal battle, they'll have one." The segment aired that night, and the impact was immediate. By the next morning, the HOA's email inbox was flooded with complaints. Homeowners started attending board meetings demanding answers. A few even dug into the HOA's financial records and discovered something shocking. The board members were paying themselves outrageous administrative fees with our dues. This wasn't just about a parking violation anymore. This was about corruption. That afternoon, I received another letter from the HOA, this time hand-delivered by a board member, an older man in a stiff suit who barely made eye contact. "Mr. Carter, the HOA board has decided to rescind your fine as a courtesy. However, we strongly encourage you to comply with community standards moving forward." I smirked. They were scared. They thought that by dropping my fine, I'd back down. But they had just shown their hand. If they were willing to make my fine disappear after all this backlash, it meant they knew they were in the wrong. And I wasn't about to let them off the hook that easily. I folded my arms and looked the board member right in the eye. "I'm glad you're dropping the fine," I said. "But we're not done here." I stepped forward, lowering my voice just enough to make him shift uncomfortably. "I want every single unfair fine you've issued to my neighbors dropped. I want full transparency on where our HOA fees are going, and most importantly," I leaned in, making sure he heard every word, "I want your resignation." His face went pale. He mumbled something about discussing it with the board before practically running back to his car. I watched him leave, my heart pounding. I had just declared war on the entire HOA, and I wasn't backing down. The moment the HOA backed down on my fine, I knew I had them on the ropes. They were scared, not of me, but of the fact that their dirty secrets were starting to unravel in front of the entire neighborhood. But dropping my fine wasn't enough. They needed to be held accountable. So I did what they never expected. I hired a lawyer. With the help of some neighbors, I got in touch with an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Mark Lawson, and the moment I told him what was happening, he laughed. "Classic HOA power trip," he said. "They think they can do whatever they want because no one challenges them. Let's change that." Together, we started collecting evidence. Emails, letters, financial records, anything we could get our hands on. Thanks to the growing pressure from the community, some former HOA members even came forward with the whistleblower information. One of them, a woman named Karen Mathis, revealed that the HOA had been inflating fines and using them to give themselves bonuses. That was it. We had them. The HOA takes me to court and loses. Instead of backing down, the HOA doubled down. They filed a lawsuit against me, claiming I had defamed them and incited hostility in the neighborhood, but they underestimated me badly. The court date was set, and by the time we got to the courtroom, it wasn't just my lawyer and me sitting on one side. Half the neighborhood showed up. People packed the benches, eager to see the HOA finally answer for their abuse of power. The HOA's lawyer, an expensive suit who probably cost more than my mortgage, stood up first and tried to make me look like the villain. "Your Honor, the defendant has violated community rules, encouraged non-compliance, and publicly attacked the HOA's leadership," he said, voice dripping with arrogance. "We believe he should be held responsible for the damage he's done." My lawyer, Mark, just chuckled and stood up. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, sliding a thick folder of documents onto the judge's desk, "the only ones causing damage here are the HOA board members themselves." Then we exposed everything. Mark walked the court through every fabricated fine, every misused dollar, every abuse of power. He showed the illegal financial records, the inflated fees, and the blatant attempts to silence homeowners who spoke out. The judge listened intently, flipping through the documents. Then she turned to the HOA president, a woman named Linda Sharp, who suddenly looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. "Ms. Sharp," the judge said, "can you explain why HOA funds were used for administrative bonuses totaling over $50,000 in the last 2 years?" Linda fumbled for words. Well, Your Honor, those were necessary expenses." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Necessary? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks an awful lot like embezzlement." A dead silence fell over the courtroom, and that's when I knew we had won. Victory. The HOA falls apart. By the time the hearing was over, the HOA had lost all credibility. The judge dismissed their lawsuit against me, ruled their fines unenforceable, and ordered a full audit of their finances. Within weeks, the fallout was massive. The HOA president resigned in disgrace. Several board members were forced to step down. An investigation was launched into where all the HOA fees had gone. All unfair fines, mine included, were officially wiped clean. And the best part, the HOA had to pay for my legal fees. A new beginning. After everything settled, the neighborhood felt different. People weren't afraid anymore. The new HOA board, made up of actual honest homeowners, started implementing real reforms. No more ridiculous fines, no more shady fees, and most importantly, I could park my damn truck in my driveway. One evening, as I stood outside, sipping a cold beer and looking at my F-150 parked exactly where it belonged, one of my neighbors walked up to me. "You really did it," he said, shaking his head. "You took them down?" I grinned. "They messed with the wrong guy, and just like that, our neighborhood was ours again."